It's been 100 years since the first 24 Hours of Le Mans was held, and the 2023 edition is gonna be special. It's the start of a new era for sports car racing with the explosion of the hypercar category, and as always, there's gonna be plenty of familiar names on the grid for us Imsa fans. Conveniently timed between round 4 at Laguna Seca and round 5 of the IMSA season at Watkins Glen, this year's 24 Hours of Le Mans falls in a perfect little lull in the IMSA calendar. There's been plenty of conflicts in recent years, most recently with the race at Detroit that would take place on the Le Mans test day. However, this year, with the WeatherTech Championship not making the trip to Detroit, it unlocks many more drivers as well as teams themselves to compete in this legendary race. And let me tell you, there is some significant both driver and team representation from IMSA in this year's Le Mans. Let's start off with the hypercar teams from IMSA that are going to be competing in this race. Starting off with the number 3 Cadillac. Yes, that is the yellow one. It will be driven by Sebastian Bourdais, Renger van der Zande, and Scott Dixon. And this squad has been great so far in IMSA. They've had some great runs, they've had some bad luck along the way as well, but they also picked up the most recent victory in GTP out at Laguna Seca. And in fact, that chassis that they won with at Laguna is going to be making the trip to France as well. And this is due to a massive crash that Renger van der Zande had at the last WEC round at Spa that necessitated this chassis to be shipped over. The number 75 Porsche Penske Motorsports car, driven by Felipe Nasr, Mathieu Jamey, and Nick Tandy, will also be competing in this year's Le Mans. And speaking of successful IMSA campaigns so far, these guys have been right up there as well. Jamey and Tandy actually lead the GTP class ranks after a win out at Long Beach and another strong run at Laguna Seca. And with a very strong lineup like they have, there's sure to be strong competition at this year's Le Mans. Rounding out the GTP IMSA teams that are making the trip over is the number 311, the Action Express Racing Cadillac. Yes, that is the red one. And that will be driven by Pipo Derani, Alexander Sims, and Jack Aitken. You know, it's kind of interesting how 3 of the 4 GTP winning teams are making the trip over to Le Mans. Anyways, though, they were the winners of a wild race at Sebring, which was round 2 in the championship, and they're going to bring over that same strong driver combo that took home the win in that race. We're not done with IMSA prototype teams that are making the trip over, though. There is one LMP2 team that's going to be making the trek, and that is the Tower Motorsports number 13. You see, Tower Motorsports got the invitation to this year's Le Mans on account of John Ferrano winning the Jim Truman Award last year. Unfortunately, though, for the Canadian, he is not going to be making the trip over with the team, and it was recently announced that fellow IMSA driver Stephen Thomas would be replacing Ferrano in the ride. Unfortunately, this seems to be some carryover from the accident that John had at Laguna Seca, and he is sitting this one out as a precautionary measure. Stephen Thomas will be joined by fellow IMSA driver Ricky Taylor in this entry. And then to round out the IMSA teams that are making the trip, there's plenty of drivers, don't worry, we'll get into that in a moment, but to round out the IMSA teams making the trek over, there are definitely a few notable ones here. Starting off with the number 16 Proton Competition Porsche, this will be piloted by Ryan Hardwick, Zachary Robichon, and Jan Halen. Of course, they compete under the IMSA banner, under Wright Motorsports, but they did enlist the help of Proton to field this entry. And speaking of IMSA award winners, Ryan Hardwick got this invitation based on him winning the Bob Aitken Cup last season. They are not the only regular IMSA team that's going to be dipping across the pond, though, and this one I understand might be a little bit of a stretch since they do compete full-time in the World Endurance Championship, but the number 33 Corvette, which in this race is going to be driven by Ben Keating and also featuring LMP3 driver Nico Verone. This is one of the strongest entries probably in the WEC right now. I don't think there's any doubt about that given their early season results, and they are sure to be some of the favorites heading into Le Mans. And speaking of favorites, why not put in a fan favorite in there? The number 56 Project 1AO Racing Porsche, of course, affectionately referred to as Rexy, will be driven by Gunnar Jeanette and PJ Hyatt. And then rounding out the list of IMSA teams, again, I know some of these are a bit of a stretch since they do compete full-time in the WEC, but that's the number 98 Northwest AMR, which is now the Heart of Racing Aston Martin. Now, Heart of Racing inherited this entry after Paul Della Lana announced that he would be stepping back from racing. So for this year's Le Mans, it is going to be piloted by Ian James and Alex Riberas, who's going to be coming over from the Imsa operations to compete in this car. Now, in addition to these Imsa teams that are going to be making the trek over for this race, there are going to be plenty of drivers that are competing in entries as well. In the interest, though, of not being here all day, I'm only going to call out the drivers that are currently competing in a full season or a Michelin Endurance Cup season this year in Imsa. Starting off in Hypercar, in the number 2 Cadillac, you are going to have Earl Bamber joining that ride. In the number 5 Porsche Penske Motorsports Porsche, you'll have Dane Cameron and Michael Christensen. They are both Michelin Endurance Cup Series drivers this season. And then you have a long list of drivers that are going to be competing in the LMP2 class. Starting off with the number 2 United Autosport, you're going to have Felipe Albuquerque, a very strong driver, competing in that ride. In the sister car, the number 23 entry, you have Josh Pearson, who is a Michelin Endurance Cup Series driver, and Tom Blomqvist. That is a very strong combination there. In the number 41 Team WRT entry, you have Luis Delatraz. Spoke about him in a recent video and how he might be one of the favorites to land a ride in that second Wayne Taylor Racing Acura for next year. And then you have the number 45 Algarve Pro Racing entry that will feature an entire IMSA lineup with George Kurtz, James Allen, and Colin Braun. The number 47 Cool Racing entry will feature Simon Pagenaud, and the number 48 IDEC Sport entry will feature Paul-Louis Tang. Panis Racing features Tiemann Vanderhelm, who is, of course, on the Banana Boat entry in IMSA's GTP class. And then rounding out the IMSA drivers that are competing in LMP2, you have Ben Barnicoat in the number 80 AF Corsa entry. In the GTE class, in the number 25 ORT by TF Aston Martin, you will have Michael Deenan, who is a Michelin Endurance Cup Series driver. In the number 54 AF Corsa Ferrari, you will have David Ragon, again, a Michelin Endurance Cup Series driver. You have 2 more Michelin Endurance Cup Series drivers in the number 57 Kessel Racing Ferrari in Scott Huffaker and Daniel Serra. And in the number 77 Dempsey Racing Proton Porsche, you will find Julian Andlauer. An entry that you're sure to recognize is the number 85 Iron Dames Porsche. Of course, this entry is also competing in IMSA this season in the Michelin Endurance Cup, and driving it is Sarah Bovey, Michelle Gadding, and Rahel Frey. And finally, in the number 100 Walkenhurst Racing Ferrari, you will find Chandler Hull. One of the most intriguing entries on the grid, the number 24 Garage 56 entry, will feature driver Mike Rockenfeller, of course, also from JDC Miller Motorsports in IMSA's GTP class. Now, in addition to all these IMSA drivers and teams, there of course are also going to be other support staff and crew members that are going to be making the trip across as well, and they're sure to play critical roles in their team's success. Speaking of success, there are certainly going to be a few IMSA teams and drivers that I'm going to be keeping an eye on for this one. And in Hypercar, gotta keep a close eye on that number 3 Cadillac. Yes, the yellow one. They really have been heating up as of late. Of course, they're coming off that Laguna Seca victory, and I think if they can just stay out of trouble, then they're gonna have a very good shot at picking up a podium in this. In LMP2, you can't help but ignore the stacked United Autosports lineup of Josh Pearson, Tom Blomqvist, and Ollie Jarvis. There's such a strong combination of drivers, and heading into this, they have to be one of the favorites to take that LMP2 class win. And then there's GTEM, and man oh man, it is hard to go wrong picking the Corvette here after the season that they've had so far. Ben Keating and Nico Veroni will be joined by Nicky Katzberg to form an incredibly strong lineup. And if they can combine that with some of the great raw pace that the Corvettes had here at Le Mans last year, then they are going to absolutely be a force to be reckoned with in this year's edition. Now, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is one of, if not the most iconic endurance race in the whole world. And while this race is about 10 times the length of an average IMSA race, these drivers and teams that are going over have plenty of experience in the Michelin Endurance Cup races that range anywhere from 6 to 24 hours in length. You can learn all about the Michelin Endurance Cup right here. A big shout out to all of the early Patreon supporters. If you too want to support the show, then you can head to patreon.com/offintheesses. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend. It doesn't go off in the S's.